This video is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. The US Army has about 115,000 soldiers in the E-4 pay grade, the vast majority of whom are specialists. That's more than all of the Army's privates first class and privates combined, and 29% of all enlisted personnel. So the Army has a lot of specialists, but why? Many of these soldiers aren't strictly specialists. Many are just soldiers in non-technical trades that have been in the Army for a couple of years. This video is going to look into the history of the specialist rank in the Army and answer why the E-4 Mafia is so prolific. Our story begins in World War I. Prior to 1920, if a soldier was in a technical or skilled job, whether that be playing a bugle, working as a mechanic, manning the battalion mess, or making horseshoes, each position got its own title with its own pay associated with that title. There wasn't a simple pay grade system like there is now. Whereas now a soldier might be an E3 private first class with a 92G culinary specialist MOS who's paid as an E3 but does their job like everyone else, a soldier would have been a cook during World War I and have their own rank insignia. This resulted in a very large amount of ranks, with up to 128 different rank insignia and no unified pay structure. Following World War I, Congress passed the National Defense Act of 1920, which rectified this. No longer would all specialties get their own rank. All enlisted men would be grouped into 7 pay grades, with 7th being the lowest and 1st being the highest. There would be only 8 rank titles, which was a massive simplification. However, there was an issue. Manning of non-commissioned officer ranks was regulated by Congress, so the Army couldn't promote soldiers with valuable technical skills willy-nilly to get them higher pay. So in came the workaround. At grade 7 and grade 6, the Army introduced specialist rates on top of soldiers' ranks to afford technical experts more pay without having to make them NCOs. There were 6 classes of specialists, from Specialist First Class to Specialist Sixth Class. There's no official specialist insignia as it wasn't a rank, but sometimes worn were unofficial insignia, adding rockers onto a PFC stripe. Specialists would retain their rank, whether that be private first class or private, but be paid more without added leadership responsibility or authority. As an example, in 1922, a private first class with the rating of specialist first class with a little over 8 years of service would make about $63 per month, which was the same as a sergeant at grade 4. This is what was in effect during the interwar, but the system was again updated at the onset of America's entry into World War II. In January of 1942, the specialist rates at the 6th and 7th grades were converted into technician ranks at the 5th, 4th, and 3rd pay grades. They were Technician 5th grade, represented by the Corporal insignia, Technician 4th grade, represented by the Sergeant insignia, and Technician 3rd grade, represented by the Staff Sergeant insignia. Initially, they essentially had NCO authority and outranked soldiers in pay grades below them, but were themselves outranked by equivalent non-technician NCOs at their own pay grade. However, this was changed later in the year. In September 1942, new technicians would have the authority of privates despite getting the same pay as the equivalent NCO. Additionally, a T was added to their insignia inset under the chevrons to reduce confusion. Still, in the field, they were colloquially addressed by the equivalent NCO rank, so they weren't called a Technician 4th grade by regular soldiers, they were called a Sergeant. There was also the pre-existing Technical Sergeant, which was initially meant for leadership positions in technical roles like a Communications Section Chief, for example. Technical Sergeants usually drew from the specialist rates and later technician ranks. Technicians filled roles such as radio operator, medic, cook, vehicle driver, mechanic, and others. Their rank was about their experience and competence, and their authority was mostly meant to be within their own trade. So they were more doers and instructors in their field rather than leaders. But there was another initiative that led to what we have today, that being rank inflation during World War II. Prior to early 1944, the position of assistant squad leader was filled by a corporal. Squad leaders were sergeants and platoon sergeants were staff sergeants. However, in late 1943 and early 1944, these positions were shifted up 1 rank. Assistant squad leaders were made sergeants, squad leaders were staff sergeants, and platoon sergeants were technical sergeants. This measure was to increase pay and morale for combat experienced NCOs. This resulted in a few things. There were no longer any leadership positions for corporals to fill in the infantry. There were still company clerks, but as of late World War II and into the Korea era, corporals essentially became senior privates. BAR and heavy weapons gunners would become corporals, as well as a significant portion of a rifle squad as senior riflemen, despite not having anything to command. Post-war, the technician ranks were victims of the Army's major rank reorganization and simplification, being cut in August 1948. But just a few years later, new specialist ranks were introduced in March 1955 that would be in the same pay grade as corporal, sergeant, sergeant first class, and master sergeant. They would be specialist third class, second class, first class, and master specialist respectively. When the Army introduced the modern pay grade system in 1959, going E1 to E9, the specialist ranks were also refined into their modern Vietnam late Cold War era form. Specialists were added to every pay grade from E4 to E9, with the rank title based on the pay grade. So for example, an E4 a specialist would be a specialist 4, an E6 would be a specialist 6, and so on. These specialists were not NCOs, but like the prior technician ranks, existed in tandem with NCOs in terms of pay. In the infantry, Specialist 4 essentially replaced the niche that the dumbed-down corporal rank had filled during the Korea era, that being filling positions like automatic rifleman, senior rifleman, and grenadier in squads, essentially manning weapon systems that, while not requiring leadership authority, required more experience to employ effectively. Over the course of the Cold War, the number of specialist ranks were reduced, being folded into the NCO ranks. Specialist 8 and 9 went away in 1965, Specialist 7 went away in 1978, and finally the Specialist 5 and 6 in 1985. Specialist 4, then retitled Specialist, was the only one that remained. The concern that led to this was likely that specialists at the higher pay grades were getting put into de facto leadership positions, so while they were getting extra pay, they didn't have the same prestige or de jure authority of the equivalent NCO, even though they were often doing NCO work. The lowest specialist rank remained because it gives junior soldiers opportunities for early advancement without having to meet the more rigorous requirements of NCOs. At the same time, the lack of specialists higher up in the chain, as there were during the early Cold War era, means that to make any career advancement, soldiers have to get promoted to NCO ranks with leadership responsibilities. This is why specialist, akin to the terminal lance, lance corporal in the Marine Corps, is often the rank a soldier will leave the service as, because it is the last rank a soldier can be a doer without having to be a leader. But if a soldier doesn't want to be a leader, after a certain amount of time, they will be forced out. And that's why there's so many specialists in the Army. It began as a means to give technical experts extra pay without NCO authority. However, following rank inflation and the gradual culling of the higher specialist ranks, it's resulted in the specialist becoming akin to a senior private who gets junior NCO pay, has influence over junior enlisted soldiers due to their experience, but doesn't have the stigma or codified responsibilities of an NCO. And now I just want to give a quick shout out to our Patreon supporters, especially our producers. If you want to get some perks like early access to videos, Patreon only chat on our Discord, and exclusive wallpapers, consider becoming a patron, link in the description. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you all in the next one.